First, the inheritance. Before the election, I said that we would face the worst inheritance since the Second World War. Taxes at a 70-year high, debt through the roof, an economy only just coming out of recession. Mr. Speaker, I knew all of these things. I was honest about them during the campaign and the difficult choices that it meant. And the British people knew them too. That is why they voted for change. But upon my arrival at the Treasury 3 weeks ago, it became clear that there were things that I did not know. Things that the party opposite...
Order. This is an important statement for your constituents. Sorry? It's important to my constituents to hear as well. If I'm struggling to hear it, they're struggling at home as well. So please, you'll all get your chance to question. I think it's more important to hear and then comment. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Things that the party opposite covered up. Covered up from the opposition, covered up from this House, covered up from the country. That is why we're today publishing a detailed audit of the real spending situation, a copy of which will be laid in the House of Commons library. I want to take this opportunity to thank my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, for his leadership, and to Treasury officials for all their work in producing this document. Now let me explain what it has uncovered. Mr. Speaker, the government published its plans for day-to-day spending in the spring budget in March. But when I arrived at the Treasury, on the very first day, I was alerted by officials that this was not how much the previous government expected to spend this year. It wasn't even close. In fact, the total pressures on these budgets across a range of areas was an additional £35 billion. Once you account for the slippage in budgets you usually see over a year and the reserve of £9 billion designed to respond to genuinely unexpected events, it means, Mr. Speaker, that we have inherited a projected overspend of £22 billion. A £22 billion hole in the public finances now. Not in the future, but now. £22 billion of spending this year that was covered up by the party opposite. If left unaddressed, it would mean a 25% increase in the budget deficit this year. So I will today set out the necessary and urgent work that I have already done to reduce that pressure on the public finances by £5.5 billion this year and over £8 billion next year. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about costs for future years that they signed up to but did not include, like the compensation for infected blood, which has cross-party support. I'm not talking about the state of public services in the future, like the crisis in our prisons, which they have left for us to fix. I'm talking about the money that they were already spending this year and had no ability to pay for, which they hid from the country. They had exhausted the reserve, and they knew that, but nobody else did. Yet they ducked the difficult decisions. They put party before country. And they continued to make unfunded commitment after unfunded commitment, knowing that the money was not there, resulting in the position that we have now inherited. The reserve, spent more than 3 times over, only 3 months into the financial year. And they told no one. Mr. Speaker, the scale of this overspend is not sustainable. Not to act is simply not an option. We have already seen official ONS figures this month showing that borrowing is higher this year than the OBR expected. And the disaster of Liz Truss's mini-budget shows what happens if you don't take tough decisions to maintain economic stability. Some, including the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor, have claimed the books were open. How dare they? It is not true. And let me tell you why. There are very clear instances of specific budgets that were overspent and unfunded promises that were made, but that, crucially, the OBR was not aware of for their March forecast. I will now take each of these in turn. First, the asylum system. The forecast for the number of asylum seekers has risen dramatically since the last spending review, and costs for asylum support have risen 7-fold in the past 3 years. But instead of reflecting these costs in the Home Office budget for this year, the previous government covered up the true extent of this crisis and its spending implications. The document I am publishing today reveals a projected overspend on the asylum system, including their failed Rwanda plan, for this year alone of more than £6.4 billion. That was unfunded and it was undisclosed. Next, in the wake of the pandemic, demand for rail services fell. But instead of developing a proper plan to adjust for this new reality, the government handed out cash to rail companies to make up for passenger shortfalls, but failed to budget for this adequately. Because of that, and because of industrial action, there is now an overspend of £1.6 billion in the transport budget. That was unfunded and it was undisclosed. Mr. Speaker, since 2022, the government, with the support of this whole House, has rightly provided military assistance to Ukraine in response to the Russian invasion. The spending audit has found that there was not enough money set aside for the reserve to fund all these costs. We will continue to honour these commitments in full. And unlike the previous government, we will make sure that they are always fully funded.
Call the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Chancellor for advance sight of her statement, and I echo her thoughts for the people and emergency services of Southport. Today, she will fool absolutely no one with a shameless attempt to lay the grounds for tax rises she didn't have the courage to tell us about.
Order. Now then, this is the Cabinet. I want it to act like a Cabinet, like a rabble that's trying to shout the Shadow Chancellor. Jeremy Hunt.
She says, Mr. Speaker, the information is new. But she herself told the Financial Times, you don't need to win an election to find out the state of public finances, as we've got the OBR now. Paul Johnson of the IFS says the state of public finances were apparent pre-election to anyone who cared to look, which is why he and other independent figures say her argument is not credible and won't wash. Those public finances were audited by the OBR just 10 weeks before the election was called. We're now expected to believe that in that short period, a £20 billion black hole has magically emerged. But every single day in that period, in fact since January, in line with constitutional convention, she has had privileged access to the Treasury Permanent Secretary. She could find out absolutely anything she needed. So will she confirm today to the House she did have meetings with the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury before the election? Will she tell the House if they discussed public finances? Will she tell the House if they discussed any of the pressures she's talking about today? And if so, why are we only hearing today what she wants to do about them? That's why today's exercise is not economic, it's political. She wants to blame the last Conservative government for tax rises and project cancellations she's been planning all along. The trouble is, even her own published numbers expose the fiction behind today's announcement. Just 4 days ago, she presented to the House the government's estimates of spending plans for the year. Those estimates are a legal requirement, and the official guidance manual is clear. Departments are responsible for ensuring that estimates are consistent with their best forecast of requirements. They're signed off by the most senior civil servants, the accounting officers in every department. Yet 4 days on, the Chancellor is saying those estimates are wrong. So who's right, politically neutral civil servants or a political Chancellor? If she's right, will she ask the Cabinet Secretary to investigate those civil servants? And will she apologise to the House for laying misleading estimates? Of course not, because she knows those civil servants are right, and today's black hole is spurious. Just like when she says she inherited the worst set of economic circumstances since the Second World War. When BBC Verify asked a professor at the London School of Economics about that claim, he responded, I struggle to find a metric that would make that statement correct. Because, Mr. Speaker, the metrics speak for themselves. Inflation is 2% today, nearly half what it was in 2010, when we had to clear up the mess inherited from a Labour government. Unemployment is nearly half what it was then, with more new jobs than nearly anywhere else in Europe. And so far this year, we're the fastest growing G7 economy. And over the next 6 years, the IMF say we will grow faster than France, Italy, Germany or Japan. Indeed, just 2 days before the election was called, the managing director of the IMF praised the previous government's handling of the economy and said it was in a good place. This week, the Institute for Fiscal Studies said it was not a bad situation to take charge of and certainly not comparable to the 1940s or 1970s. Mr. Speaker, if you're in charge of the economy, it's time to stop trash talking it. What's the point of going to New York or Brazil to bang the drum for more investment if you come home with a cock and bull story about how bad everything is? She should stop playing politics with Britain's reputation and get on with running the economy.